Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Dr. Corey, and I'm here with Dr. Andrea Popole to talk about addressing your stress or tips for dealing with stress and anxiety in high school. What do we want you to learn from this lecture? We'll start by looking at what is stress and anxiety, how does it feel, what may cause it, and what are the differences between stress and anxiety. Coping skills to deal with stress and anxiety, options for getting help if and when professional treatment is needed. And we always want people to remember that you are not alone and things will be okay. And there are resources out there to help when stress and anxiety becomes a problem. Some quick facts on anxiety is, first and foremost, anxiety is common. We all know what it is like to experience anxiety in our everyday lives. And we really want to be mindful of that and learn strategies to manage that, but also kind of know what are the markers for when it becomes a problem and when we may need to address it. 1 in 3 kids and adolescents meet the criteria for an anxiety disorder at some point before they turn 18. And there are several types of anxiety disorders. I sometimes like to refer to these as the flavors of anxiety, and they include generalized anxiety, when people often worry about anything and everything, obsessive compulsive disorder, which is noted by persistent intrusive thoughts and compulsive rituals or repetitive rituals that people often do to neutralize those thoughts, separation anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, specific phobias, and panic disorder, which is usually panic disorder is the most common, is just recurrent and persistent panic attacks. What is anxiety? Anxiety is an emotion characterized by nervousness, apprehension, or worried thoughts. Some people use the term fear, but these are more kind of notable terms. It comes from a part of the brain called the amygdala. As I mentioned before, everyone experiences anxiety from time to time. And some anxiety is actually considered adaptive because it helps us keep us safe. It helps us make responsible decisions. It motivates us to work hard. Anxiety, however, becomes a problem when it continues, even though there's no specific threat or danger, or when it begins to impact someone's ability to function in everyday life. What are US teens stressed about today? Or what kind of triggers their anxiety, in other words? And this is just a brief list of some things that we hear when we talk to teens that they worry about that really is kind of unique to this generation. Kind of increasing levels of loneliness. People worry about money or the economy or job prospects or really the job market, sexual harassment. It's in the media often that there's an increasing suicide rate, particularly in this age group, migrant family separation, political turmoil, school shootings, climate change, gun violence, social media. These are just some of the things that really are somewhat unique to this generation and do cause a lot of stress and therefore anxiety in people's lives. And I put et cetera, et cetera, et cetera at the end because there are many, many other things that young people worry about as well.
So I'm going to segue and talk about the fight or flight response, which is basically the brain's response to any kind of threat. This fight or flight response is activated by our sympathetic nervous system, and really it had a purpose to keep us safe from physical danger, back in the day when we were running away from predators or physical threats to our safety. But now that our society has evolved, our threats look really different, and they're really more emotional, psychological, or mental in nature. So things like getting a bad grade or getting bullied or trying to please other people or fitting in, those are what our threats look like now, but our brain still kind of responds in the same way when we experience these types of threats. So really anxiety can be, especially when it's disproportionate to the situation that we're facing, sometimes, anxiety when it becomes at an extreme or more disordered level, it's really a false alarm. It's your brain telling you that you're in some kind of danger, that your life might be in danger, when most times you're not. And so again, each time your brain is facing a stressful situation, it's acting as if you're running away from a lion or something that is immediately life-threatening, and causing you to feel all those physical symptoms. We can't turn off that alarm because, as Dr. Corey mentioned earlier, some anxiety is adaptive, and really having some sense of fear is helpful because we do need that response. So we can't turn it off completely, but coping skills can help to turn down the volume so that it doesn't become as disruptive to your life. So things that you might notice in your day-to-day, again, this sense of nervousness or apprehension, something just doesn't feel quite right. You might have worry thoughts, although sometimes you may not. You may not even know what you're feeling worried about, but your body is feeling off. You might experience those stomach aches or headaches, again, secondary to the digestive changes or the muscle tension that your body is experiencing when it's in this state of anxiety. It may be more difficult to go to school or go to the normal activities that you do. You might have a difficult time concentrating when normally you can. We also see teens talking about like fidgeting, nail biting, or skin picking, kind of that restlessness, like it's really difficult to sit still. And the difficulty separating from caregivers, again, sometimes people find that home is their comfort zone and it's their safe space and they don't have to deal with a lot of stress when they're home. So sometimes leaving home or leaving, your caregivers or mom or dad can feel really challenging. Perfectionism is something we see a lot, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But anytime you're having a difficult time tolerating a change or transition, that can also signal anxiety. In general, our brains are very calmed by predictability and consistency and routine. And that's, again, go back to this idea, if we're having to fight a lion or a physical threat, we want to know when the lion is sleeping, when the lion's going to be awake, when he might, be out to get us. And so having that predictability actually feels relaxing and calming to the brain. So when we have to experience change or transition, sometimes that can signal anxiety because things have suddenly become a little bit unpredictable. You might notice a change in your mood, might feel a little bit more irritable. Again, that's kind of that fight mode that your body's getting into. Compulsive behaviors, which I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide, or just seeking reassurance and just constantly feeling like I need to know that everything's going to be okay. The biggest and most important thing that we like to look out for, though, is when these symptoms or symptoms of anxiety begin to impact your ability to function. So if you cannot get out of bed, you're not able to get to school, you're not able to keep up with your normal activities, that's when anxiety has started to become a pretty big problem. All right, so I'm going to talk about the cycle of anxiety. We know that anxious thoughts will create anxious feelings. So an example of an anxious thought is, I need to get straight A's, otherwise I won't get into college. When you start to have that thought, your body is going to naturally start to feel the emotion of anxiety. And then that anxious feeling will then create either a compulsive or an avoidant behavior. So the avoidant behavior is to procrastinate, right? If I don't work on if I don't study, or if I don't face my schoolwork, or I put it off, then I don't feel anxious, right? Because my brain is not dealing with that situation in the moment or having that anxious thought. The compulsive response would be to study over and over for hours, again, in a compulsive way, because then again, if I keep studying, it gives my brain something to do, it gives my body something to do. And so temporarily, I feel relief from that anxiety. The problem, though, is that those avoidant behaviors or those compulsive behaviors end up reinforcing the anxious thoughts. So if you studied over and over, then your brain now thinks, well, obviously I did well because I studied. Or if you procrastinated, it just reinforces this anxiety that, well, now I didn't do what I needed to do, so I probably won't get into college. And over time, you'll notice that your anxiety will actually grow because we haven't challenged it. We haven't challenged the initial anxious thoughts that were contributing to these feelings to begin with. So what can we do about it? So for mild anxiety that we all experience from time to time, that kind of comes and goes, and it, we can directly pin it to a stressor. We talk about basic relaxation and coping skills to kind of calm down the body when it goes through these anxious periods. We talk about reducing stress, because we know anytime we're stressed, our resources to deal with anything get lowered. So the more stress we can reduce, the better we can cope with anxiety when it does come up. And just maintaining generally good, healthy behaviors like nutrition, sleep, and exercise. When it gets to the moderate level, where it's a little bit more impactful in your life, and you're starting to notice, like, this is affecting the way that I feel, and it's affecting my ability to do a few things, we talk about therapy. And I will explain what cognitive behavioral therapy is also in a later slide. But it is an evidence-based type of treatment to work on anxiety symptoms. When it gets to the severe level, we talk about adding in medication. And again, severe is when you feel like you cannot function because your anxiety has now gotten pretty bad. So coping and relaxation skills, again, the main point of these things is to calm the fight or flight response by activating the other part of your nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system. And the result is that the symptoms of anxiety can decrease. So taking slow and controlled deep breaths, again, it helps to turn down that sympathetic nervous system that gets activated during fight or flight. And it helps you feel more calm, more in control, so that you can problem solve then and think through your thoughts and behaviors more effectively. Mindfulness and meditation, again, it kind of slows your brain down. And most of the time, the things we're anxious about are from the past or the future. But if we're really in the present moment, our bodies and brains can feel more calm. So mindfulness kind of helps to guide that. Guided imagery is imagining yourself in your happier, calm place. And the more senses you can involve in that, the more it mimics that sense of calm in your brain. And then progressive muscle relaxation. Again, since your muscles do tense and tighten during stress or during that fight or flight response, learning how to relax them by tensing and releasing them not only gives you awareness of what's happening in your body, but it can help you feel more relaxed when you're engaged in this coping skill. Some ideas for mindfulness, and I know this is such a popular buzzword out there now too, but again, the whole focus is to really ground you into the present moment. So a few things that you can try that are easy to do, even if you're sitting in the classroom and are noticing that your anxiety might be increasing, is just, again, stopping and paying attention to what's in your surroundings. Notice what you can see, smell, touch, maybe taste. I don't know if you're, if you have a drink of water or, something else that you can kind of notice what's the texture, the taste is like, or looking around the room for different colors of, starting with red, going to orange, yellow. What this does is, again, it just grounds you in the present moment and slows you from, slows down that fight or flight response, slows down some of the rapid thinking that's making you feel anxious. These are just a few apps that have been actually highly recommended from some of the people that we work with, but there are so many and they keep getting developed. So it might be worth considering just for extra practice to download something and figure out what works for you. In terms of professional treatment, so again, when that anxiety is getting to the moderate severe level, there is a type of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, that's evidence-based, which means that there's been a lot of scientific data to show that it works in reducing anxiety. And really, the goal of CBT is to help you understand how certain distorted or dysfunctional thinking patterns may be contributing to anxiety, and it helps you learn better, more adaptive, balanced ways to think and interpret your daily life and daily situations. It also then, the behavioral part, a lot of people, again, avoid things when they become anxious. And so CBT can help you recognize those areas that you might be avoiding and worsening your anxiety, and then help you face them so that you can control the symptoms of anxiety. Medications are sometimes indicated. So if it is the case, talk to your doctor or your psychiatrist about what your options might be and ways to reduce side effects. So again, in CBT, that cognitive part is we look at thinking traps, and these are just a few. I won't go over all of them, but just to give you an idea that there are certain ways of thinking that we just know are not helpful. Like black and white thinking tends to be a very common one with anxiety. So when you hear things like always or never, or every time, or nobody, those are kind of key signals or red flags to look out for, because probably there's a more balanced way to interpret whatever it is you're facing at that time. Same with blowing a situation out of control, or out of proportion, or jumping to conclusions. We, psychologists, I think we made up this word catastrophizing, but it's kind of like seeing the worst possible outcome, or only seeing the negative side of things, or putting these high expectations on yourself, like I should. So all these kinds of things can be really unhelpful when you're just facing daily situations. So CBT really does kind of help you have better ways of thinking about it. Again, your daily situations, your circumstances, your interactions with people. So some questions you might consider is, what is the evidence that I have for this thought? So many times these thoughts just come up so automatically that we never question them, and we just take them to be true. But really, when you evaluate, do I actually have evidence to support that this thought is true, or is this just kind of coming based on a feeling or my anxiety? We can generally come up with more balanced and adaptive ways to look at that situation. What would someone else say about my thought or situation? Or similarly, what would I say to a friend if this were to happen to them? Right? We tend to be harder on ourselves than other people. How likely is it that my worry will come true? Oftentimes it feels like it's much more imminent or dangerous than it actually is. And if it is true, what's the worst that could happen? And even if it does happen, what if my worst case scenario happens, what are the chances I'll be okay? And will it matter, even a week from now, a year from now? Sometimes we lose sight of all those things because all we can see in the moment that we're feeling anxious is the danger at hand, or the perceived danger at hand.
Some other strategies we kind of want to focus on, and kind of prioritizing what's important, is always remember there are only 24 hours in a day. And as a young person, you still have to have time to eat, to sleep, to spend time with friends and family, and really kind of model your day in a way where you're able to get done what you need to get done, but not getting overwhelmed with things that are really frivolous or really unimportant or unable to get done. It's important to remember to make sure you're not overcommitting yourself to extra activities that you may not have enough time for and that you truly don't enjoy. This is something, just talking to high school students on a daily basis, we hear all the time that they're just over involved or spread thin. And we really want to remind people that this is a time in your life where you just need to be very mindful of that. It's always important to consider what's important and practice saying no when appropriate. You don't have to do it all. And that's one of the points we really want to drive home, is we really need to be sure we're balancing our lives and that we have time to really take a breath and be able to do the things we enjoy and balance those with the things that we have to do on a daily basis, like school and studying and work and things of that nature. Other helpful behaviors that are just really helpful when it comes to any mental health related issue, including anxiety, is it's always important to maintain a healthy and balanced diet. We all need to make sure we're getting an appropriate amount of sleep and practicing good sleep hygiene. 8 to 10 hours is what's recommended per night for your average adolescent. We need to get some sort of physical activity or exercise on a daily basis. really, the CDC recommends this to be about 60 minutes per day. But really what's most important is just making sure it's consistent and something that you can do on a daily basis. And also, lastly, just balancing or limiting the amount of time spent on electronics and or social media. Obviously, when we put too much time towards that, it's taking away from other things that we need to get done. And also what we're realizing through evidence and some data is really the more time we spend on social media, it just really doesn't make us happy or any more fulfilled, and potentially works in the other direction. Just a couple of comments on sleep. Is one thing we know is getting enough sleep is essential for optimal physical and mental health. During sleep, the body and brain undergo several processes that change to help strengthen and restore both our body and brain and mind. Poor sleeping habits can impact mood and cognitive function, as well as other psychiatric symptoms. And just lastly, you need a minimum of 8 to 10 hours of sleep each night. This is especially true for adolescents, but likely true for adults as well. Just a couple comments on sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene are really a list of things we can do that really helps improve our overall sleep. And I listed really the common, these common sleep hygiene factors, and I'm going to go through them briefly, but it's just important to know that if we can focus on getting better sleep hygiene, really it will just improve our overall sleep and our emotional health. Make sure the bedroom is comfortable and pleasant and keep it cool, eliminating extra lighting. Be consistent with our bedtime routine. Try to be consistent about our sleep and wake times. Don't take too many naps. That often really erodes our nighttime sleep. It's important not to have food or drinks, especially caffeine, in bed or several hours before bed, and to avoid large meals right before bed. We really should not have electronics in our bed, and there's some emerging evidence that the blue light that electronics emit really does alter our sleep. We need to get regular exercise, as I mentioned before, and really only using our bed for sleeping and not homework or other activities. These things can all be very helpful. Just a couple quick comments on social media and some of the things that social media reinforces in our young people. That they have to take the perfect selfie, or kind of being mindful of when other people leave them out, when other people don't like their story, or that others are prettier or better looking than they are. Everyone gets invited to a party except for the person using social media. And lastly, that nobody responds to texts or group chats, or someone else got more likes in pictures. And I'm really just using these to highlight that some of the things that social media communicates to us that really just may not be healthy for the kind of the thoughts or feelings of our young people, and ultimately possibly impacts their emotional health. Some important points just to wrap up is don't keep negative thoughts and feelings to yourself. It's always important to reach out to get support. Always remember you're not alone, and there are always ways to get help, whether through professional channels or through friends or loved ones. Anxiety can alter normal thinking patterns and even make it more difficult for people to recognize when they need help. So that even makes it more important to reach out when you're not feeling well. And lastly, just being kind to one another. It's really important, I feel, and Dr. Apapalei and I feel, that creating a culture of kindness and acceptance. And that ultimately may reduce some of the stressors that worsen the issues that we've talked about in anxiety in general. And here are some kind of resources and our contact information for our clinic. Really, we use our social media channels really to just promote good professional mental health education and resources. Thanks for joining us today, and we really hope that you got and learned some useful information from this lecture.
Thank you.